Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and my sincere honor to welcome Rob Marshall.
Wow, that was like a "This Is Your Life" up there.
I just watched all those films, and I want to see them all again after looking at that reel. You're so welcome. It is such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much, Rob, for being here. There's so much to go through. I can't wait to jump in. There's almost too much for 90 minutes. We have to go like 290 minutes.
Lordy.
Yeah, extended director's edition. But as Mary Poppins says, off we go. Let's jump right in. Though this is a Screen Actors conversation, I want to go back a little earlier than that and talk about your childhood in Pittsburgh, and just ask you not what your favorite film musical was or the first one, though those may come up in the answer. But what was the film or a moment when you saw the marriage of filmmaking and musicals, and you saw that mechanism happening, and you saw the potential that was going on for both forms to sort of complement each other?
Wow, that's such a great question. I mean, it is odd that, or interesting that my first film that I ever saw was Mary Poppins. So, I was 4. And I mean, I don't know if I recall everything about it. I do know that I remember the feeling, of magic and music and dance and cinema. We didn't watch it on television. I mean, you watched it, on a big screen where it's meant to be seen. And so I have a feeling, that was something that launched me. But I was that guy, all growing up, that I was the one who would wait on television and look at the television guide to see what musicals were playing, and I didn't care what it was, as long as it was a musical, and so that was me. And then, a big movie for me that came out when I was about 13 years old was That's Entertainment. You know what I mean? Because what happened was then I started, because I didn't know that. I mean, I knew some of them, obviously I knew, but I didn't know all of the Judy Garland films, all the Gene Kelly films, all the Fred Astaire films. I didn't know them that way. I mean, I knew Singing in the Rain, or I knew the big ones, but I didn't know them all. Yeah. So that was just opened my mind to all of that. That was thrilling. So, and musical. I mean, I was very lucky because, when I was growing up, my family would go to the theater to see, and you would have assigned seats in a movie theater with and programs and an intermission to see Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, Oliver, those movies. Even musicals like Scrooge or The Happiest Millionaire, like those kind of those event musicals, roadshow musicals. Right, and so that was like going to the theater for me, and those movies definitely shaped me for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting because in so many of your films, there's at least one time, if not several moments, that remind me of the thrill you still get when you see Singing in the Rain, and the 3 minutes into the title song when the crane shot goes up, when Dona brings the camera up, and you just feel like, oh, like the film has you in its grip, and it says like, you're ours, essentially. We've got you. This movie is into your heart in a lot of ways. And so many times in your musicals and all your films, there's a moment like that where the camera just sort of, where you just feel as if you're in that moment and the film has got you.
It's funny because I do feel, and I learned this from Hal Prince when I was a choreographer. I started as a choreographer, so I watched great directors and I watched not so great directors when I was working, and I would see who treated actors beautifully and who didn't, but who also understood how things worked. And you sort of you take the best from the people you work with, I think. I hope you do that. And I certainly did. And I remember Hal saying to me, you have to grab them in the first 10 minutes. There's, you have to set the rules and then be consistent about it. So if you are doing something, a movie like Chicago, as an example, has a very high concept. That there's these two different worlds. There's the world of her mind, which is the vaudeville world that she aspires to, and then the real world. And that you have to create those rules back and forth, the sort of cutting back and forth of that, and get people on board. And I think people will go with you, but then you have to be very smart. You have to follow that and not not change the rules halfway through the movie. You have to be consistently following that. And I think that's true. You have to, because I think you set tone and you set place and you set feeling and you set the rhythm, you set all of that right at the beginning. And you say, well, this is going to be, when I did Memoirs of a Geisha, I remember, that had an epic sense to it because it was an epic story, meaning that it was a long, from a young girl to, an older woman, and sort of had this full, long journey for her, and so you wanted, you couldn't go cut. You had to kind of have the slower entrance into that film and understand this is good. That's the longest film, I think, in terms of length that I've done, because it has that kind of storytelling. So every film has its own very specific, rhythm and rules, and my hope is to grab people. The hope is to grab them. What grabs me, my dear great friend, the wonderful director Anthony Minghella, who passed away way too young, said to me, "You're hired for your taste. You're hired for your taste." And I thought, well, that's kind of true. I mean, that's what you're hired for. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing people I know that I love, and that's really what it is. That's it's who you are, what you bring to something. That's really what it is. Yeah.
You mentioned your esteemed career as a choreographer. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, obviously, some of those that got you 5 Tony nominations: Damn Yankees, Kiss of the Spider Woman, Victor Victoria, and of course your amazing work on Cabaret. Yes.
Right across the street.
That's right. Now, though it wasn't in the clip reel we just saw, I want to begin the screen discussion proper with a shout out to the 1999 TV movie Annie for lots of reasons. One is I love it, yes. Plus, it was the highest rated TV movie that year, and it won you an Emmy for choreography and a nomination for directing, and it was, no small footnote, obviously, your screen directing debut. What I loved about in reading about it is that you were a little hesitant about it, but you saw that there was a Dickensian quality to this property, obviously, and it sort of it grabbed you, and then you felt this was the natural fit, directing, obviously. What was it? Was there anything that sort of going into Annie that made you feel like, kind of overcoming that hurdle and saying, now I'm just going to kind of keep on running in a way?
Joe, you're so smart. Can I just say that right now, that you even know Annie? But I will tell you about my first day shooting. I was so nervous because I'd never said action and I'd never said cut before. And I know that and it sounded so cliche to me to say, so I was really nervous about doing it. And I remember we were shooting at Universal Studios and we were right by the Jurassic Park ride. So the Jurassic Park ride is playing that big music as I'm walking into the soundstage, bum, 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 and I was like, oh my God, I thought I was gonna die. It was horrible. And I remember the first scene was a very small scene. It was with Kathy Bates, and we'd rehearsed. So at least I was coming from the theater. I felt more comfortable because I'd rehearsed, and I basically had a cast of actors from Broadway. Yeah. So they were speaking my language, I was speaking theirs. So it was Victor Garber and Audra McDonald, Alan Cumming, Kristen Chenoweth, Kathy Bates. This was my cast. I was so happy because, the theater guy was going to direct a film. But I remember when I got to that moment where I had to say action, I didn't. I couldn't say it. I just felt it was I couldn't say it. So I just went, and go. Isn't that terrible? That's what I said. And then I remember I didn't even say cut. I said, well, that's it. And I was like, I just couldn't do it.
Wow.
But then I finally thought, it's okay. You're allowed to say it. You're allowed to do it. Take ownership of what you're doing and just do it. And so I finally did. And I will say that at the end of that, that was short. I think we shot it in 6 weeks. It was a very ambitious movie, but we were rehearsed, and I was so organized because out of total fear that I just kept going and going and going, and I remember by the end of it, I said I felt in an odd way more comfortable doing film than even theater, because and then it occurred to me that when I was doing theater, to sort of escape the proscenium of it all, I would imagine what the film would be. I said, well, the film would be da-da-da-da, so on stage we'll have to do this, but always the freedom of thinking of what it is on film is really where my head went. So then I didn't have to then transition into the proscenium. It was very interesting, and then I found that I loved perfecting, 2 minutes, because you spend 2 minutes. I mean, on a feature film, you spend literally like all day on 2 minutes, and I loved that sort of refining and perfecting each thing, and then having this mosaic with all these pieces to then pull together. And I loved, and a lot of theater directors don't like film because it's slow. It's very slow. And so it takes time to light, and everybody's like waiting, and lighting takes forever. But I don't mind it. I actually liked the rhythm of it. And some people are like, the longest film that I ever shot was Pirates of the Caribbean because it was so huge. It had a $250 million budget. So in the circus of it was just like, whoa, and huge. And I shot for 100 days. And by the end, it is like you are a marathon runner. Yeah. You're running, and some people are like starting to go leave behind. And I will say, Johnny was there to the end with me. He was right there to the end, and by the way, the most lovely, generous man, sweetest, kindest, elegant man. You would never know, with all his tattoos and his things and stuff. He's like the gentleman of all gentlemen. He walks onto the set and says hello, good morning to everybody. He's just a lovely, kind man. Loved working with him, and I did again in Into the Woods.
Yeah, he's a great old-fashioned.
Yes, he's like an old-fashioned movie star.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he is.
That.
Yeah.
Well, one last note on Annie, which I love because it also has there's a sense of it being a look back to obviously musicals of the past, but also sort of we see the DNA of Rob Marshall's future in there, because there's scenes when Victor Garber and young Alicia Morton are going down the steps. It feels like Shirley Temple and Bilbo Jangles Robinson, and there's a scene where Audra McDonald is singing to her by a snowy window that feels like Meet Me in St. Louis, and that's sort of a great callback. But then there's the Easy Street number. Feels like when you watch this film, you see Rob Marshall to come, because it uses this amazing set, every corner of the set for Kristen and Alan and Kathy to sort of crawl around on. And then they burst out onto the street, and it feels, then it becomes bigger. And it's this beautiful moment that really feels like a lot of the DNA of your future films are sort of in microcosm in that sequence there.
That's so lovely. Well, I did consider that in a way an MGM musical. It felt like a classic musical to me. I mean, it had that Dickensian thing, as you said, and I really saw it that way. And I think you are who you are from all the things you've watched, and it just comes out of you. Yeah. And I will say that it was thrilling for me to be, because you never shoot in L.A. Yeah. And we shot that in L.A. on the back lots of Warner Brothers Studio and Universal Studios. That was so great because it felt like I was doing what they did in the golden age. I mean, I always have felt that I was born in the wrong time. I've always felt like I should be, I should have been, at MGM in the golden era, and because that's what I love, and that but I will say, doing that number, like for instance, Easy Street, and there we were. It was so hot in the Valley because we shot in the summer because it was a hiatus for everybody. And so we could get people that were doing television shows and things like that. And so we had fake snow and the whole, it was thrilling to work on something of that scale for the first time. Yeah. And Arthur Lawrence once said to me, "It's in your blood, Rob. It's just in your blood." And I think, that's kind of true. It's like, it's what's in your blood, and you find, well, that's just was kind of in my blood. And I felt so happy out there, working basically, on a big backstage movie lot doing a big musical. Yeah. And I thought, well, that would be it. That was like a one-off. I'd never do it again. But I was, it was sort of just the beginning, and I didn't know that then.
Yeah. Well, the adult sass that's in there sort of in so many ways kind of obviously comes to fruition with Chicago, which obviously the Oscar-winning. Let's give Chicago, by the way, a round of applause. Best Picture-winning blockbuster. A book could be written about the making of it, from you're going in there to talk about Rent and kind of walking out making Chicago because you had said that's what you wanted to make, to the physically exhausting shoot, 64 days, not a day off in that whole batch, right? 64 days. So a book could be written about that. But let's talk first about the great actors that are in there and how your priority was you wanted great actors. You didn't mind if they didn't have musical chops. It was the right person for the role and the right actors, right? What kind of, in kind of approaching it like that, what kind of hurdles did that present, Rob? And obviously the payoff was extraordinary.
Well, thank you, Joe. I mean, musicals were so not in fashion then at all. Not at all. Animated musicals were, but not live action musicals. And so I was told every day in my trailer, move faster. Because it was just like, and I thought, well, no one's going to see the film, and we're just going to just go as, just go until they say stop. And when I started to cast it, I knew. I love working with actors who are new to musicals because they approach it in a different way. It's not a technical way. They approach it from the character, and on film, you can't hide. You have to, the character has to, it has to be the character first. You have to believe the person, and then you pray that they have the skills. And I will say that I did some detective work, with our casting agent and so forth, looking for who does this, So I knew Catherine Zeta-Jones I hadn't seen it, but I knew she had been in 42nd Street on the West End. I knew Richard Gere had played Danny Zuko in Grease on the West End. And so that, but Renee Zellweger was a cheerleader. That's what I knew from in high school. I mean, honest to God, that was it. But I thought, well, she's a cheerleader, so she can do choreography. I thought, So so I had to do funny little things to get people to audition, because at that point they were big stars and they really didn't want to audition for musicals. So it was hard to do it. And Renee sang for me in a restaurant. I played that. We were talking, and it was. I was sort of, we were just having a lovely dinner, and I said, and I said, have you ever auditioned for, a musical or anything like that before? She goes, well, they saw me for Moulin Rouge. I said, oh, really? What did you sing? And she said, I sang a little of Diamond's Our Girl's Best Friend. I said, how does that go? So I was looking for ways to get her to sing, and she sang in the restaurant. And I said, oh, she can sing. Yeah. She was very shy about it. And then I brought her down to where we were starting to work on the choreography, and my whole choreographic team was there. And I'll never forget, she sat, and I was showing her what we were going to be doing. So I was showing her a number that Velma and Roxy were doing, the finale, and I was showing her a bit of that. And she was watching it and kind of, and then, and I thought, well, she might get up and start to, because she knew what I was doing. She knew I wanted her, and so nothing, just sat there. It's like, well, I'm up here dancing. Why am I up here dancing for Renee Zellweger? It's the stupidest thing I've ever done. And finally, it was over. And I said, well, that was that. So I just wanted you to see what we were up to, because I knew she was considering it, And so, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. Everyone left, and she and I were leaving last, and she shut the door after everybody left, and just me and her in the room. And she said, show it to me. She didn't want anybody watching but me. And so I started showing her the choreography a little bit, and I could tell in 30 seconds that she could move, because she understood it, and she had had line and knew how to do it. And jumped to, after doing, saying yes to the role, and we were in rehearsals, and I remember we were rehearsing on something, and she said to me, and she was frustrated because she couldn't sing it the way she wanted to or dance the way she wanted to, and she said, why did you hire me? She stopped. She said, what? She stopped the rehearsal. She said, why did you hire me? She goes, I can't really do this. And I said, okay. All that imperfection I want in the film, because Roxy is a wannabe. That's how I saw her. She wants to be like Velma. I love all that imperfection. She wants to be a star. She's not a star. She's a third-rate talent. I wanted to see all of that up there. I said, it's not you singing, it's Roxy. It's Roxy dancing. And then she was like, okay, you want me. Yeah. I want you. And I said, that's it. And I honestly feel that actors truly need protection. They need to feel safe. They need to feel loved. They need to feel supported. They need to feel like they're not being judged. I don't think people work well being judged. I don't work well being judged. I think they work well with someone saying, you're great. You can do it. You're fabulous. Go. And make mistakes, be bad, and then get better. But it's, I want everybody to, and so every time I've worked with people that are new to musicals, Emily Blunt, I mean, throughout my career, I've worked with so many people that are new to musicals, and they don't think they can do it, and I know they can. Yeah. I see the seed of what they have, and because I know the character will come to life.
Well, just the same way that you were able to crack it by saying, it's a presentational musical. It's all in her mind. Seeing those rough edges in her. The quote that I love from you around that time was, you didn't want to cast the same woman twice. Why would you want? Obviously, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Roxy, and Velma are two completely different characters. Yeah. They should not be the same completely type of dancers. Same type of dancers.
Exactly. Well, I saw the story. Yeah. I saw what I felt was the story. I thought it was this sort of very established theatrical person, Velma, who immediately after the first number's in jail, but she's a star. Yeah. And then there's the non-star. There's the one who shot her boyfriend, who is a wannabe, who wants to be, and so she looks at her with, envy, and she, and then the tables turn, and she becomes a star. The satire, the original satire, that the Maurice Dallas Watkins wrote is so funny, even when it was written in the 1920s, because it was just based on what was happening in real life in Chicago. Yeah. And it's not that far away from what we see now. People get, become huge stars for what? For killing people. It's like horrifying. But I saw the story, and I saw Catherine Zeta-Jones as the tough chorus girl who was the star and then gets taken down, and then comes back up again. And I saw the fragility and the vulnerability of Renee as Roxy, and some people just see the showbiz part of it. I saw the story.
And Richard Gere, of course, also is the secret weapon, maybe the secret Tommy gun might be the right phrase, of that film, because he's like there's a trust to the audience as well. And I think it obviously goes along with the sense of having Renee not be that A+ dancer. There's a sense of you want to trust the audience, and I feel that in all your films, you trust the audience to go along with you, to see the cinematic language, to read it, to go with it. And I feel like Gere obviously has that as well, so he can bring matinee good looks, but he's the bridge in so many ways between all of those amazing performers, right?
Yeah, he doesn't care about them at all. He only cares about money, which is why I love his whole first number is all I care about is love, which is a lie. Yeah. The whole thing's a lie. That's what I love about his character. He could care less about anybody but himself and money. It's like someone else we know.
That's right.
And so he just is that. Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's and he's just, and I love that. Yeah. And he's so quick and so smart. I love working with Richard, and he's so loved being in this musical because he has those chops. He has chops. That's all him tap dancing in the film. People ask me to this day, were the close-ups on his feet. I said, of course they were his feet. I had 5 seconds to shoot it. It's like I couldn't bring somebody else, and that was it. I got him, and I had 3 cameras going, and then we said goodbye. Yeah. Let me tell you something about that day, and this is a perfect example of how quickly I was moving on that film. I did 3 numbers in one day. Shot 3 numbers in one day. Cellophane was the first thing up with John C. Reilly in the morning. Then I did the Hunyaks hanging, that whole sequence that I consider a number, but that whole sequence. Mm-hmm. And then I did the tap dance at night. We went, I don't know, 18 hours straight or something like that. That crazy?
If you found extra hours in the day somehow, because
it was insane. I didn't know better, so I didn't know to say no.
There's so much sophisticated storytelling in Chicago. One thing I also want to bring up, though, is in addition to knowing what goes into this big screen, your first big screen feature musical, is also in some ways what to take out, how to keep the flow going. And what did you learn from that, Rob, in terms of kind of knowing what numbers to excise and which things to sort of blend in and kind of maybe make as one?
That is a great question, Joe, because it's one of the hardest things, especially when you love something like I love the musical Chicago on Stage so much. But then I realized, of course, that lives forever. This is a film. I have to make it work as a film. The attention span's not as long. No one's going to sit for 2.5 hours like they will with an intermission on stage and watch it. It's a different medium. It moves faster, and you have to earn a ballad. You know what I mean? You can't just have people will be walking out in droves. There has to be a sense of. And so I realized, you know what? I have to kill some of my favorite babies. I love so many of those songs. I love. Well, Class is an example because Class is something that. But I did shoot that. But that's another reason. But there were so many great numbers. Me and My Baby. It's such a fabulous number, and I Am My Own Best Friend. All these fantastic numbers, but it didn't hold. Yeah. It doesn't hold in the story. The story has a quick narrative to it, and it doesn't hold for so many numbers in film. Yeah. On stage, yes. On film, no. And so I knew that, and so Bill Condon, who wrote this with me, and we just stopped and said, no, that's not furthering the plot. Because here's the tricky thing about musicals for me. The story has to drive it. If you pull out a song, it's that classic thing, if you pull out a song, the story shouldn't work. But if you pull out a song and it works, that means it's like a variety show. And then it's like, well, maybe you can have one of those, but you can't have many of them. So it's a really complicated thing to do. And it's always been hard for me because I love musicals so much on stage that it's hard for me to do it, but it tells you. And let me just tell you about Class for 1 second. I shot Classes on the DVD extras, but it didn't work. It didn't work. I actually previewed it because I broke the rule. It's a book number. And those of you who know musicals know what a book number is. It's where people sing coming out of story, like I'm talking to you and I start to sing and you start to sing back. It comes out of story. This was not a book musical. This musical was a concept musical where the numbers happened in Roxy's mind and they were vaudeville turns. So I tried to do something that was theatrical. They were in the office, and then as they start to speak, the lights start to go down. It becomes kind of, it feels sort of show busy, but it still was a book number. Whatever happened to, and they were back and forth talking, and it just, it was exactly what I said before. I had switched the rules on the audience, it didn't work. It just didn't work. Whereas Roxy wasn't part of that number. All the numbers came from Roxy. It just didn't work with this concept of the film.
Yeah, that beautiful shot at the very beginning, going right into her eye, kind of bringing us right inside of her mind.
That was the most wild thing to shoot. It was like being in literally an eye doctor exam, because you're so close, and I'm like, Renee, stop blinking, come on, I'm coming in,
Well, Chicago also brought you an amazing team of collaborators, that many of whom still work with you to this day. Cinematographer Dion Beebe, production designer John Meyer, costume designer Colleen Atwood, and many others. Building that troupe of artists, almost like the Arthur Freed days at MGM.
Only you know that, Jim.
In front of the cameras and behind it. That's important to you to kind of have that troupe, isn't it, Rob?
Well, you know what happened during that? First of all, I love those people, and they are supreme artists at the top of their level. But at the same time, I had created a little mini Arthur Freed unit where everybody learned the rules of how this works and how musicals are done. Musicals are so rare, and they're still hard to do. They're actually harder than most films to do. I mean, I've done both. I know they're harder. They're twice as hard as a movie that doesn't have music and dance and that. They're twice as hard. So when I started working with them, they had learned how we do it, how we rehearse, how they come in. So we've sort of trained with each other. They know exactly how it works, and so to pick up a whole new team. And I love them anyway, but it's shortcut now. I mean, when I worked on this, the only person I didn't work with on Mary Poppins Returns was Colleen.
Yeah.
Because Colleen wasn't available and she was heartbroken, but I worked with Sandy Powell, so that wasn't too shabby. Her costume work is stunning in that.
Well, artistry and the appreciation of it is also a crucial thread in Memoirs of a Geisha, which in 2005 was a bold choice for a second feature, but it has a lyrical musicality inside of it. I love it, and in many ways, I mean, it's about presentation and dance and heightened emotion, and truth, reality, and grit is in there too, and dance is important. What drew you to Memoirs of a Geisha?
Well, the funny thing was, it was kind of funny. I honestly wanted to do something completely different. I was in that very rare position where your movie wins an Oscar and you're offered everything. And I thought, well, I'm just going to do something completely different. I'm going to do this epic film with an entire Asian cast that I would literally have to direct through interpreters. So I said, I'm just to challenge myself. I'm not going to do the easy thing. I'm not doing Chicago 2. I'm going to do that. And then I was working on it, and I said, I realized that it's basically about two women in show business who are rivals. And I thought, I'm doing the same damn movie again. It just hit me like, what is going on with me? I don't know. It was an attempt to do something completely, but I will say that was a thrilling movie to work on that the palette of that, the scale of that, the story. And it was so interesting because I had Japanese actors and Chinese actors and Korean actors in the film. It was a Pan-Asian cast, and with the exception of Michelle Yeoh, none of them really spoke English. So I was working with interpreters to communicate with them. And what I found was so interesting was after, a few months in, I didn't need the interpreters. They would talk to me in Chinese, and I would understand what they meant just by the feeling of what they were saying, because we were so connected. And I said, I understand. Okay, get it? And I would speak back, and they, but it was incredible. It was an incredible experience that.
Well, it looks like this kind of plays into that really well, actually, because the film is obviously rightly lauded for its Oscar-winning visuals, among other things. But something that struck me in watching again is how it must have been a muscle-building exercise for you in what, like, the cultural critic Roland Barthes would sort of call the human face as idea and event. Because right alongside the physicality of musicals, the worlds of emotion that are in Gong Li's face, Michelle Yeoh's face, Zhang Zi's face. What skills, Rob, did that fine-tune in you, kind of from a cinematographic point of view, kind of as a director dealing with sort of the human face? What did that fine-tune in you?
Well, once again, I know what I like when I go to see film. You can have all the beauty and all the magic and all that, but if you're not connected to the human being, there's no movie. I have to feel so deeply what they're feeling, and this was a story about people. I mean, everything is. I'm always looking for the human quality. That's what makes it, that's what excites me. A lot of directors, film directors, don't like leaving the camera. I'm the happiest going up and working with the actors and finding what they do and then going back and trying to capture that.
Yeah.
When there's a moment in the film, there's a little tiny piece of it there when Gong Li burns down the okiya, which is Japanese for house. She burns it down. It's all paper anyway. So it's she just crashes the land. She's like literally suicidal, and she's sitting in the fire. And what happened was we shot up till lunch, the fight and all that, and then after lunch we were going to shoot the close-ups and the rest of it, which is when the fire was going, and she's just sitting there. Gong Li is such an extraordinary actor. She did not move from the position she was in. We called lunch. I had to. Everybody went, came back, and they're working on lights. They're shutting down the set. She just sat there and did not move until we got back. She wanted to stay in that space, and then we got back because it's a film. See, the interesting thing about film, and I learned this coming from the theater, is that it's like the Olympics. You have to land your triple sow cow. You know what I mean? You gotta go. You know what I mean? You gotta land it. That's it, and you move on. So it's not like you build a performance for months and months and months, and then you finally have found it. I always rehearse. That's very important to me. Always have rehearsal, because I find it's very important to find out who you are, and I can't stand the panic on set when it's like, what are we doing? Where are we going? I mean, everybody has to know what they're doing, and it has to be so we can just shoot it. Yeah. But I will say, having that moment with Gong Li, and then when we got there, she was so there. She was so present, and it was astonishing to watch. And to me, that is the movie. Those moments are the movie, because you can get with a camera, you can get in where you can on stage. That close up, that you can get inside them. It's extraordinary to do. It's a very personal thing too when you're filming. I remember shooting with Sophia Loren on 9, and we were, Sophia Loren. So I was, I couldn't believe it. But she was nervous about being in front of the camera because she hadn't for a long time. And we were doing a scene, and I could see that she was nervous. So it was a close-up, and I held her hand the whole close-up to make her feel that she could do it. This is Sophia Loren. But she's still thinking, and she was so extraordinary. That face, the camera. Some cameras love certain faces, and that face is just,
Oh, that's a perfect segue
legendary.
to talk about 9, which is another film about art and the artists who make it. Chicago is a film that features a group of women who are murderers all in a row. This is a murderer's row of some of the world's most extraordinary actresses: Nicole Kidman, Penelope Cruz, Marion Cotillard, Sophia, as you mentioned, Kate Hudson. And in the middle of it, of course, one very lucky Daniel Day-Lewis. Maury Yeston's music and lyrics are so different from Kander and Ebb's, and I'm wondering how, in approaching 9, Rob, how that different style, kind of more insular style of musical, affected the visual aspect to it, your approach to it as a director. How the two, in some ways, or maybe just the disparity between the two, and this new approach that Yestin has approached the directorial sense.
Well, it's the most complicated film I ever worked on because it's a musical that's a high concept musical as well. And so it's always challenging to make that kind of thing work. Very difficult to make that work. And I will say, because it's a Fellini film that became a musical on stage that became a movie musical. And so, but the bones are basically film. And so there's a lot of leeway there. So because you're in a Fellini world. You're in that world. That's the bones of what it was. And so I was able to, it was a similar style in a way to Chicago because I'm working through him, this artist who is dealing with a crisis in his life. He can't make a movie. He can't move forward, and there's a reason, because he's not a whole person. So he can't move. That's why the last line of the film is action. He can finally move forward and he loses everything. And Daniel Day-Lewis on that film was extraordinary to work with. And people talk about him all the time, it's so weird, when he did Lincoln, and do we have to address him as President Lincoln and all that kind of thing, that kind of. But for me, it was, his process I loved it because he came on the set as the character and stayed in character, and he didn't want to be. I called him Daniel all day long, but people wanted to, people were like, "Is he Guido? Is he Daniel? What is he?" And I said, "Okay, just stop all the weirdness, because here's the thing: he does it for himself. Yeah. He does it for himself because films are weird. Films are go, stop, go, stop." And so he just wants to be in the space, so when we're going, he's there. He wants to live it. We did a fabulous scene. It was a press conference, and I said, "I'd like to rehearse it." And Daniel said, "I don't want to rehearse it." I said, "Well, I'm going to rehearse it, and you're not going to do it." Because he said, "I just want to be fresh. I don't want to know where the questions are coming from." And I said, "Fabulous." So I went in and rehearsed so that everybody knew when to do, and how to do it. And then he came in and just lived it. And it was so extraordinary just watching him live it, and because that's the experience he wants. Some people, actors are different. I think for me, I have to change my way of directing for their process. I'm not the guy in the room that's like the ego guy saying, "Do it my way." I hate that. That doesn't get anything. For me, it's about serving them. What do they need? What do you need? I will say, jumping back to Annie for one moment. My first day on Annie, that same day when I couldn't say action in God, which is I walked on the set, and there was a director there that I had worked with as a choreographer who I didn't like. And I thought, "Oh my God, why is he here?" And he said, "I'm here to give you good luck and tell you to go good." I thought, "Oh my God." And so, and he said to me, he said, I'm here to give you advice. And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Oh, okay, what's that?" And he says, "Well," he said, "everyone here is here to serve you." I thought, "Oh, okay." And then I remember him turning around and leaving, and I thought, it's exactly the opposite. I'm here to serve everybody. That's what I realized. Yeah. That's what I realized. I'm here to serve everybody. That's really the key, and why his direction was so abrasive to people. Because it was sort of like this, and I was like, "No, I'm there to do that." And so, and that's what I feel with actors when I'm working with them. I'm there to serve you. How can I make you great? What can I do? I know you have greatness. Let's find what that is and how you work to make it great.
Judi Dench on that film, there's a great quote that she said that you direct by stealth, which I think is terrific. That you talk with your actors, you suss it out with them, and that somewhere within that is a bit of a conversation of how it should be done for everyone to get what they need, and I love that. And and Penelope commented that this was her favorite film to work on since she was a kid, and obviously like that is all there. What I love is that Daniel though had to really be convinced. You had to really convince him. He didn't think he could do it. You had to really fight for him to kind of. He was giving you options of other actors.
But he does that on every film.
Oh, does he? Okay.
He does it on every film. He doesn't say yes till the very last second, because he wants to convince you that he's wrong for the film. So that's what he spends the entire time doing. He did that with Steven Spielberg. Told me about this. Every single film he does, he says, "I'm not ready for this film," and I would say, "No, you are." No, 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 no. And then we would sit down and come up with names of people that would be better. And I'm no. That's what he does. And he does that, and then he would call me and say, "When is the last second I can tell you?" I was like, "Oh my God, okay." So and I'm looking at the film schedule, and it would like. And I finally said to him, I called him and I said, "You have to tell me tomorrow. You have to tell me tomorrow. We've been talking about this forever." And so then I got a phone call, and of course I wasn't there. It was a message. I was like, "What?" And I looked at it, and it was him, and he said, "God help me, yes." But because because when he does it, that's why he's retiring. It's just it's his whole soul. It's everything. You know what I mean? Some people people give so much, but he is beyond. Yeah.
And he's terrific in the film, and there's so many levels going on within the film anyway, but there's levels going on within his performance. You saw a little bit of the physicality there. I mean, it's sort of this extraordinary four-dimensional performance.
Well, everyone, people loved working on that. And like a lot of those actors were new to musicals. Not Judi Dench, who was in Cabaret in the West End playing Sally Bowles. But there were, it was, Marion Cotillard was new to Penelope Cruz. It's so thrilling to work on a musical for actors, because they don't know that, first of all, you become a company in that way. There's something that musicals do where you all come together because you're rehearsing. You have to rehearse a musical. You can't not rehearse a musical. And you're doing pre-records, or you're doing, musical rehearsals and choreography and dance rehearsals and all of that, and it just pulls everybody together. It's so thrilling. And I know Daniel loved that experience. And you know what he loved more than anything were the dancers. Because he loved the discipline. I was a dancer, I know. So underrated, what they do, who they are. Thank God the musical chorus line came around for people to see. That's what it is. The people in the back that back up, you don't see a little glancing moment of, those are the people that have the discipline. They are there to kill themselves, and every single time with no ego. With no ego. It's a pretty extraordinary. And he was fascinated by the work ethic of the dancers.
And I've been humming Be Italian for the last 5 days, so I have to bring this up, which is that scene, because you are also obviously the choreography of the films, and that sequence, the original obviously just has a few tambourines that the boys have, but giving all of them tambourines and opening up that scene, it's an amazing scene that Fergie does, and it's the number sort of just becomes like, it just oozes off the screen in this amazing way. It like explodes, and it's sort of this beautiful opening up in a way that is just these slight little touches that end up making it so much more.
That's what you can do on film that you just can't do on stage. You could never have a cast that size. You could never have an entire stage filled with sand. You know what I mean? So they could, that's what was so thrilling about that kind of thing, to do that. And that's what I mean about working on film. You can just open your mind up to the biggest canvas, and create something so special. And to have all those powerful women doing that was so thrilling. I love female-centric numbers, like He Had It Coming, and that. I don't know. I just find it so exciting to work on, and they're so beautiful. Listen, in this film, the Mary Poppins Returns, I finally did a big masculine number. I was so excited. It's like, one that I would have been in. Triple Little Life, fantastic. So that was that. But listen, I'm always so at home and so happy when I'm working with dancers, on a big production number.
We'll talk about big levels and big productions in general. Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides 2011 brought you to these other levels. That is the second highest grossing of that franchise worldwide, by the way. And now the film reunited with Penelope, but you came to it actually because Johnny asked you to do it. Is that right, Rob? Like, Johnny asked you to board the ship. What was that like?
I met with Johnny. They snuck him in underneath and through the whatever. I guess I was at the Sunset Hotel, and so he came in, I guess, through the garage, and they up through the kitchen, and there he was. But he's so unassuming. He's kind of shy in a weird way, if that makes any sense. But he was. I loved him right away, and it was because of Memoirs of a Geisha that he wanted to work with me. And he said, they offered me 2 films. They said, do you want to do Pirates of the Caribbean or do you want to do Lone Ranger? Those are the 2 movies that he was working on at the time. And I just thought, well, I don't really love Westerns, so I'm so, and I love the Pirates franchise. And I was, what's been exciting for me is that, movies for me, these big movies take 3-4 years. It's like your life. It's not like just your work. It becomes your life. So they have to be something that's exciting and new. And I wanted to do a big, huge action film of that scale, 3D. I wanted to learn all about that. I wanted to be part of that because, that's now what people see in the theater more. That middle film, there are independent films now and huge blockbuster, mostly Marvel / superhero films. And then the middle films, which is what Chicago was, which 9 was, which Into the Woods was, are so rare. It's not an independent film, and it's not this huge, they're these very rare things. Yeah. So I was excited. I said, I want to see what that is, what that canvas is, what it's like to work like that. And what was interesting was people were concerned. He said, there's a lot of fight, there's big action sequences. And I said, I'm so at home with that because I'm a choreographer. I know that's, because they thought it was such a departure. I thought, this is so not a departure. No. Instead of dance steps, they're just killing each other on a ship.
Right.
And so I said, it was like, you know what I mean? So it was I was totally at home doing that kind of thing. And the stunt people became the dancers for me. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I felt very, very at home. That was a thrilling movie to work on, and mostly because we were all over the world with it. We started shooting in Hawaii, and we were on Kauai and Oahu, in the jungles where Jurassic Park was filmed, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, those jungles. And then we were in Oahu for all the water work. Then we went back to LA for this big, huge mermaid sequence, and that was crazy underwater photography and night shoot for 3 weeks. And then we went to Puerto Rico for a Caribbean moment that we needed. It was like for a week. That was like a deserted island, and then we went to London and did all the interior work, and the film begins in London, so we did some location work there too. That was a massive scale production. When we would go out into the water on a ship, there were barges, and because someone has to light it, the moonlight's not going to work. So these huge barges with just lights, and then another barge that was all costumes, and then another barge that had all the background actors, and then another. It was like we were going out like this big armada.
Right.
It was like unbelievable, and it was like, and I would say this little voice, and action, and it would go happen, and cut. By then time I was fine to say, oh, action, cut. Relaxed enough to say.
Well, there's the action sequences in there are balletic and beautiful. You mentioned London. There's the scene that Judy cameos in that Johnny Stuntable has to go from the top of a carriage to a guy's head to a thing and then there's the scene on the boat where Barbossa and Sparrow are the boat is rocking back and forth, and it's a very balletic sequence. It's very much.
Well, you know what I learned? I learned that first of all, I learned to really, because I hadn't really worked with storyboards and what we call previs, which is like an animatic, which you basically shoot. It's like a little cartoon version of what it's going to be. So you can work on the camera angles and you can make those adjustments, and that's become more sophisticated and more sophisticated. So I learned how to work with those tools. And it's very helpful to be a choreographer, because it is all choreography, and so that was really fun to create with this, because I spoke their language in a different way, but still spoke exactly what we're talking about in terms of, and so that's why it was nice to do that. It was a bridge to get into that kind of big scale film.
Yeah. And one final note on it, which is that there are scenes in there with Johnny and Penelope where they're sort of like almost like Cary Grant and Roz Russell in His Girl Friday, but carrying scabbards and fighting Cog Rogers. That there's a beautiful sort of sassiness to their banter, that their back and forth, that's really terrific, and that I really I see you in that, enjoying their repartee.
Well, the thing is, here's the secret: every single film I've done is really His Girl Friday over and over again, because I love the film so much, because I love that kind of contentious relationship. I think it's so funny. I love that quick banter. I love all that so much. So one day I will do like a 30s screwball comedy, but it always is in there, and that's what the kind of relationship I love. And Penelope and Johnny are just heaven to work with, heaven, because I'd worked with her on 9. What's interesting was she was so pregnant during that film, so pregnant, and I remember we had to make a big decision. Are we going to stick with her? And I loved her so much, and I wanted to do it, but it was challenging. She'll tell you. it was, because eventually we actually had her sister, who looks just like her, just for the wide shots, because she was enormous, enormous, and. But the thing is, she's such a great actress. She just, I was able, I worked from here and just made it work. I mean, film, you can do tricky things like that, And then Emily Blunt on my next film was completely pregnant.
That's right.
And she was getting bigger and bigger. She was playing the baker's wife in Into the Woods, and she was getting bigger and bigger. I thought, what's going on with me? But then, I realized I'm working with women at the height of their careers, and they are having children, of course. That's part, that's part of their life. They're having children. They're in their 30s. They want children and a career. And I was like, good for them. They should. They should have both. They should have it all.
Into the Woods, another film I love, 2014, like Chicago, reinvented what people kind of thought musicals could be. And in this case, a true modern masterpiece, Stephen Sondheim, fantastically translated to the screen. It's a conversation you had with Sondheim shortly after Chicago, right? That got it off the ground, Rob.
How do you know all these things?
I just wake up knowing.
I want to know. You're bugging my phone or something.
I'm reading your diary, that's right.
No, but Joe, you're so smart. I finished with Chicago. Everyone said, "What are you going to do next? What's your next musical going to be?" And so I did say in some interviews and things, and because I felt it deeply, I want to do a Sondheim musical, because Sondheim musicals had never really been on screen. And so we sat down at his townhouse, his beautiful townhouse, and I'd known him because I'd worked on three musicals with him on stage, and I said, "What do you think, Steve? I know what I love. What do you feel?" And he said, because at that point Sweeney Todd hadn't been filmed, Follies still has not been filmed, as we know, and Into the Woods, and he said, "Into the Woods for you." He said, "I feel Into the Woods. I feel you would understand that. You would understand the heart of that, because it is such a unique piece, because the first portion of it is just a madcap, wonderful, wild, everybody's so desperate, for something. I wish it all starts with I wish. They all want something, and then they get it, and that's maybe not what they wished for. And that whole second half of like, careful what you wish for, and then what happens and how what turns, what happens after Happily Ever After is so unique and so interesting. It's what makes it so fascinating. So I had it in the back of my head, and did other movies instead. But then I was listening to, it was Obama was speaking to the victims' families of 9/11 on the 11th anniversary of 9/11, and he was speaking to them, and he literally said these words. He said, "You are not alone. We are not alone." And in other words, we're all there. We are all your families for the victims of that horrific attack. And I thought, now's the time for Into the Woods. I just felt, because that's that famous song, "No One Is Alone." And it really is about the community coming together and dealing with a major crisis, and how do you move forward when there's a giant. And the giant at that point, when they had written it, was AIDS. Mm-hmm. James Lapine wrote the screenplay and told me that's what they were battling. And so and there's always a giant, right? There's some giant we're all dealing with, and how do we come together as a community? That's how you come together. You can't fight alone. You can fight together. So I felt because you have to feel, because movies take so long, you have to love them. You have to want them so badly. You have to want to be, in that world for a long time. And so that's what began the whole Into the Woods experience.
And the subtext and seriousness of the film, which I just love, and I recommend anybody with kids 10 and up to kind of to show it to them, because it's a movie about maturity, and it's a movie that sort of brings them from one level to the next. Then in conversations with Disney about that, obviously they backed you 100%. But did you have concerns initially that the palette would be a little darker, obviously towards the end, and maybe that might be conversations that you would have to have with them?
Very much so. They wanted to work with me after Pirates. I had such a great experience with them, and I thought, okay, how about Into the Woods? And it was sort of like, oh, oh, yeah, okay, so Cinderella doesn't end up with the prince in that one, and people die. So I was like, okay. But I said to them, I think it's a beautiful way to explore the fairy tale genre in this century. I said, otherwise, and I remember someone close to them who's very smart said, if you don't do it, you will look antiquated. It has to evolve. The fairy tale has to evolve. And so so it was not easy. It didn't get greenlit right away because they were like, "What is this?" So I did a reading of it in New York because no one knew it really. I mean, the executives didn't know it. It's not that, you know what I mean? Kids know it because they do it a lot in schools. That actually helped me to say that, you know, it's like the third most done musical in schools. They were like, "Oh, really?" You know, so, because they want to see what, you know, they're going to put some serious money into this. They want to know that it's going to work. So I did it. I did a reading of it, and that helped because they saw how funny it was, and they saw how fascinating it was, and they were like, "What are all those lyrics?" You know, they were like, you know, it was very helpful. We had a great cast. I think 2 or 3 of them were in the film, but eventually, but not most of them weren't. But then Meryl came on board, and that did it. That launched it. They were like, "Oh, Meryl wants to do this?" She had never done a Disney film, a film for Disney. So I was like, Meryl Streep wants to do this. Oh, really? Okay, then it was sort of like, and that's what happens sometimes. You have to get an actor to commit so that then they go. And so then it was like, okay, and then we started moving.
I love that Disney was both excited and scared, just like Little Red Riding Hood.
They were, till the second we opened, and yeah.
And by the way, we just talked a couple of minutes ago about things to cut. Is the story right that Sondheim and James Lapine were sort of saying, you know, you could cut this, and you're like, oh no, don't take that out. Like
James Lapine was ready to cut the entire opening. I said, why? It's so cinematic. Boom, 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 boom. He said, we'll just start all over again. You know, because they're the writers, they're the creators. They were so free about it. I was much more protective of the material, much more throughout. It was, and that was a tricky one too, because we had to find things that we had to lose. It's impossible, but it's so important for people to remember that it's a film. It's a different genre. It's not the stage. And you know what? And I know how, I can feel how long, and I'm not talking about the Broadway audience that knows it. I'm talking about the audience that's going to go see it, that it doesn't know Broadway. You know, in mid-America or wherever, I don't know where, or across the world, where they just don't know the theater, and they're seeing it for the first time. More people saw that film on the first day than ever saw it on Broadway. And first day. That's what film does. So you have to make sure that it reaches people and works as a piece. And that's when you have to go, okay, this is a film, it's a different genre, the stage will live forever. That stage version will live forever. But the film, you have to attack it differently. So it's a very interesting dynamic to work on.
You saw that for that opening, that 16-minute segment. You saw it as a film right away. Like you were able to kind of envision it. You saw them all going in there. You kind of had it mapped out in your head in so many ways. Right?
Well, I love all the stories. It's so cinematic. You know, I mean, what's interesting is cinema in a way came to stage with those concept musicals that Hal Prince and Michael Bennett did, where you would cut, you could cut on stage instead of just bringing, like rolling on a big set piece and then rolling it off. That's what it used to be, and bringing the curtain in and doing in one. You could actually cut to different scenes, and now cinema's on, and the lighting is so sophisticated. It used to be lights up, lights down, and button for the end of the number, and then, you know what I mean? Now, you know, it became cinematic, and so that's what you realize when you're, you know, and so that's what you know, I felt with Into the Woods. It was so cinematic already. Because of the individual stories, they were so interesting and converging together. It felt like a film to me.
Yeah. And let's talk about this amazing cast, because obviously Emily starts off there with you, but there are so many that we want to talk about also. James Corden and Meryl, obviously, and working with those amazing actors on this particular project. I would imagine, like, you know, we're talking about that you want to create a troupe, but on something like this, everybody is kind of bringing their top of their game. It's Sondheim, it's you, it's 2014. There's so much going on. What were some of the challenges that you weren't expecting? What were some of the hurdles that you maybe did expect that maybe, you know, everything sort of evened out in some ways, Rob?
Gosh, I guess the biggest hurdle was I always find the biggest hurdle is just making it work on the page. I mean, that's the biggest hurdle for me. And making a 2-act structure work as a 3-act structure, because film has a 3-act structure to it. It just naturally does. So how do you do that? And so, I mean, thank God James Lapine was so open, and so is Steve. They were just so open to a film. And so, it was, you know, I always, like I said, I have to rehearse. And that's when you also, everybody is on the same film. Because the tone, what's the tone? Are we sending it up? You know, are we coming from a real place? You know, that's so important. I mean, to me, it was all about stakes. Everybody wanted something so bad at the beginning of this film. They had to have something. And so, you know, I will say that that's always the biggest challenge, getting it right there, because that's what you're filming. And then bringing it to life is you know, that's the thrill for me. And I also had my amazing my amazing team with me, you know, that know how to do it.
Yeah. And had you met Meryl previously, obviously?
I knew her, but not well.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hi, hello, nice to, you know, good to see you, that kind of thing. I will say, though, we were at the SAG Awards when Nine was nominated for Best Ensemble and a few other awards. And I remember, and I was sitting next to Sophia Loren came. She was nominated for Best Ensemble. So I was sitting next to Sophia, who was so divine, and no one could believe she was there. And she actually turned to me and said, she said, oh, I can't believe I'm here with all these famous people. And I said, I said, what? I said, no, they can't believe they're here with you. And anyway, so the SAG Awards ended, and Meryl was nominated, of course, that year, and she was across the way, and I saw her coming towards us, and she was doing this. And I went to Sophia, and she was, and she came over to me, she said, I want to work with you. When are we going to work together?
Wow.
And I thought, okay. And then she did my next film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, that's a great story.
I just couldn't believe it when she was pointing at me. Why are you pointing at me? Just assumed it was, of course, Sophia.
Well, Into the Woods exists in the past and the present. It's a great segue to Mary Poppins Returns. And while all of these films deserve amazing rounds of applause, let's have a huge round of applause, please, for Mary Poppins Returns, which is so special. And by the way, after Into the Woods and Chicago, Rob has now, with Mary Poppins Returns, 3 of the biggest, the highest grossing musicals in history. Important to note. And you know, Mary Poppins Returns, Rob, we've talked about this several times. There's so many things going on there that are so special. From the beginning, obviously, where it was the first film that you had seen. But what does one do when one gets that call to do the new Mary Poppins film, and what's the first thing you do right after you get that call?
Oh, gosh. The first thing I thought was, oh, my God. That's so daunting. The film means so much to me and to everybody. And at the same exact time I felt that, I thought, if anybody's going to do it, I want to do it. Because I want to protect the spirit of that first film and usher it into this new original musical. And I was also very excited about the idea of creating an original musical for film, which I'd never done. And all my favorite film musicals were original musicals for film, like Singing in the Rain, Bandwagon, Meet Me in St. Louis. All of these were created for film, Gigi. These are like films that were created specifically for film. And I've never done that before. I'd never written a score or a story or anything, you know, and I thought, if anybody's going to do it, I really want to be that person that does it with great care and great thought and great love and honest and passion. I wanted to, and I wanted to protect the film we were creating, but I really wanted to make sure that Mary Poppins wasn't singing "Let It Go" or some crazy thing. Do you know what I mean? I just thought, you know, I wanted to make sure it was handled as the sequel to that perfect first film. And usher it into this new film. That was so important to me. So I thought, you know what, this is crazy, but I'm going to do it. And we started.
Yeah. And then Emily, of course, is so extraordinary in the film, and what she does in the film is so hard. It is so hard. We've talked about this before. It is not easy. She straddles these different lines of characters, these different levels. She is not the same Mary Poppins. She's her own creation of it, but she is also a very recognizable callback to Julie Andrews, and the film, so much of it emanates from what she's bringing to it. What were the conversations like with Emily as you guys approached it, and what was her response when you called her?
Well, the first thing that I did before even Emily was involved, although she was involved pretty soon, is I thought, I'm going right to the books. I'm going right to the books. The books were written in the 30s, in the Depression era, and you feel it in the books. They say things like the bank is broken. P.L. Travers wrote that, or she says, literally on the first or second page of the first book, that 17 Cherry Tree Lane was the shabbiest house on the street, and Mrs. Banks had a choice between fixing it up or having children. So I thought that era feels current to me, feels relatable, accessible to me. People struggling to hold on to their homes, and I felt that, and I thought the first film was set in 1910. So then that led me to, well, it's 25 years later, so Michael and Jane would be older. What happened to Michael and Jane? Was there a loss of? Do they remember what happened with Mary Poppins? What happens? And then we combine that with the loss of his wife, Michael's wife, with 3 children, and so he's lost, and he needs her to come back. So that started the whole process, and so it was the books that really were the center for me. There are 8 of them, which I wasn't even fully aware of. I knew there were a few, but there were 8 books that she wrote P.L. Travers wrote over the course of her life. So the first person I thought of for Mary Poppins, there was only one, and I never thought of anybody else, was Emily. I just worked with her Into the Woods. I thought she has all of the goods. She is such a great actress. She can play all the layers of Mary Poppins, the stern, proper nanny, and then underneath that, the child inside. And also the humor and the quick wit. And she can sing, and she can dance. And I knew, and I think she has such great warmth. And you feel her. So I thought, that's it. So when we started working on it, we went right to the books and thought, who is this crazy eccentric character? She's so nutty and odd and vain. And, she looks at everything, every time she passes like a mirror, she's always checking herself out. It's such a, and what I love about the character, it's the dualities. She's so, abrupt and kind of tough with the kids, and loves them so much, and loves the adventures. So we found this way of her playing all the layers. It's a very sophisticated performance because it's so layered. People think it looks so effortless. I think they feel that way about musicals. Oh, it's so effortless. It's so hard. It's so hard to make work, because when they don't work, they don't work horribly. You know what I mean? You because someone starts to sing and you go, oh, why are they singing it so bad? But when it feels organic and you've earned a song, and the scene's happening and the song begins and you don't feel the big seam, oh, here comes the song, and it moves out of the song back into dialogue again, and it feels like, oh, it's all one piece. This is how we're telling the story. It's such a balancing act to make that work, and it's something that we worked on so hard with this piece. This took 3 years, this film, to create from the beginning of writing it. John DeLuca and myself and David McGee wrote the story, because the books are all episodic adventures. There's no narrative to any of them. So she comes and has these wonderful adventures and then denies having them, which is the best. And so and then she goes. And so they're fabulous books, but there was no story. So we created the story, and then found our way in, and then Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman wrote this beautiful score that moves seamlessly through the movie, and we were able to accomplish what I'd always wanted to do, which was an original musical for film.
And the Mark and Scott's music, which obviously the animation in the film is like this too, and so many things in the film are like this. They're retro. They give you a retro feel, but they are also moving things forward. There's also a sense of moving the art forward or the story forward in a way that is not simply an echo of the earlier film. And you see this in the animation. We were talking about it at an earlier Q&A about how the animation sequence in the Dalton Ball does this in a really sophisticated way, because it's not just, oh, here's hand-drawn animation. Yes. It's here's this other level of hand-drawn animation that also makes you feel like you're watching something incredibly tactile. Well,
I will say there were things in the DNA of Mary Poppins that I knew if I had nothing to do with it, if I came to see it, I would want to see a live-action, hand-drawn animation sequence, because it feels that I knew that was something that was important to me to see. And so, and we found our way into this story where they get trapped in this Royal Dalton Bowl, and then it gets darker too. I mean, it's darker than because today you can go darker with children, even though it does. There's a reason for it too. It's not just arbitrary. But I will say, when we did that, when I brought that to Disney and I said I want to do hand drawn, it's so much more expensive and twice as long. It took over a year for them to draw every frame of that 15-minute sequence, every single frame. And we took animators out of retirement. There were so many animators, because they didn't. No one knows how to do that. And so it was thrilling to work with them. And they were teaching some of the younger animators who are much more interested in the hand-drawn work than they are in the computer-generated work. They're much more interested in it because it's art. They're flip, flip, flip. You've seen it, draw, flip, draw. It's incredible. And so that whole sequence, that's the first thing we shot because it was so complicated and we needed to hand over the material to the animators. So that was so thrilling to work. The layers of that, the reference dancers that were the penguins, that were the flamingos, the elephants, all that. It was a green room, and thank God we had the rehearsal that we had to work through that piece by piece, step by step, shot by shot, so that we would be able to put that all together in a seamless way.
Let's talk about the amazing cast that's around Emily. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's incredible, yes. Ben Whishaw, Emily Mortimer. Putting that amazing cast together, Rob, it kind of calls back to what we were talking about. You find the right actors for the film, but so many of them have to do things. Ben has to kind of carry that melancholy, that sadness and seriousness in the first 25, 35 minutes of the film. That's really, it has to anchor the film like that. Emily has to kind of feel almost wistful and she has kind of come back into the fold in a way. She's kind of committing herself to her cause. And Lin is Lin, and there's this light that emanates from him. Let's talk about kind of casting all of them.
Well, in the perfect world, I always hope that an actor claims their role and says, "This is mine," And Ben Whishaw, I just met with him, and I saw. He's so present, and you see into his soul. So, and I knew you had to really care about Michael, or there's no movie. It's his story. How does he become whole? Until he finally, that's the whole thing when she says, "I'll leave when the door opens." Well, the door to the idea of joy and wonder in his life comes back into his world. And so I will say, Ben he's one of the best actors of his generation. He's so great. He reminds me so much of Daniel Day-Lewis. And because of the commitment and the vulnerability that he has. And so it was such an obvious, I thought, well, that's that. I'm always looking for that thing. I also have to like them. You're spending so much, you have to like these people. And I can smell it a mile away when I'm, nope, no. I can feel it when they're real people. Emily Mortimer is a divine person, and she's so eccentric and fun and warm. And they had such a great relationship, the two of them, as brother and sister, as Jane and Michael Banks, and that's the sort of the core of the film. So to find them together was really thrilling. And then I started asking, my first choice for everybody, and everyone said yes. I think everyone wanted to be part of sending the message of this film, which is a reigniting of some hope and joy in a dark time, which is what we are all clearly in. And I felt that was my guiding force making this film. I thought, I want to be part of sending that message of hope out into the world now. I really did. I wanted to do that. And I wanted to be, because I had that. That first film gave me that. And I wanted to bring that back. It was been 54 years, And then I called Dick Van Dyke. Okay? That call, oh my God. He's my childhood hero. From everything, from the Dick Van Dyke Show, which I know every single episode, to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, to Bye Bye Birdie, to all of it. And I just thought, oh my God, it's Dick Van Dyke. And I don't feel that way about many people now, but him I do. And I thought, I wonder how he'll feel. And he was so loving and so disarming. He's a child. He said he and Walt Disney were children looking for the adults within. That's who he is. and that's who he had. That's what he is. And that's who he is every day, and he lives it. I remember I once saw him in a grocery store. I saw him at Ralph's in LA. And I saw him in the aisle, and he was dancing up and down the frozen food section. I saw him skipping around with his cart. I thought, oh my God, I love this man so much. I was too shy to say anything to him, but I just watched him. I thought, oh my God. But that's who he is. So when he came on that set to do this for us. And I had that eureka moment when we were writing it, that he could play the old banker, basically, that he played in the first film. And he is the right age now. He was not 37 like he was when he did it originally, although he had to still play him old because he is not that at all. I just remember, he walked on the set, he grabbed my hand, and he said to me, I feel the same spirit on this set as I did on the first film. And that was, like, well, you can just take me now. That's it. It's over. That was it. It was a good ride. Bump. Happy to go. I was so thrilled with that. And then, John DeLuca and I had choreographed him to go up onto this desk. I thought, oh, Lord. Because we were just thinking, will he do it? And he jumped right up.
Oh, I love that.
And if you watch the film, when he goes to get up, Lin-Manuel's hands out like this, and he's like, right up. And I said to Emily and Lynn, I said, if he falls off, you're spotting him on that desk. If he falls off, you're dead and you're dead. I did. I said, I'm going to kill you both. He's Dick Van Dyke if he falls off. Of course, he didn't need any help at all. He was perfect.
And Emily tells that story of how they were just sort of relaxing on the set for a couple of minutes, and he just stared singing "It's a Jolly Holiday" with Mary, and just
there's
turned
time.
into a puddle.
There's time in between. So we all sat at his feet like 3-year-olds, and he's telling us stories about the original film, and he literally leaned over to Emily and said, "It's a jolly holiday with Mary," and she said that was it for her too. I mean, we were all dying the whole day, and the kids loved him, and the kids knew him from the first film too. So it's they all know him from that, and he's just great with kids, and he's so funny. He ad-libbed in the film, if you see it. He's about to tell a story. I have a story to tell you, and he says there once was a man with a wooden leg named Smith. From the original film. That whole running joke about the man with the wooden leg, and he starts to tell that story, and he goes, oh, no, that's not it. And then he starts to tell the real story, and he threw that in there. I thought, he is so smart. He's so funny. He's so there, and he's such a great actor. That's what really, besides all of it, he tells that beautiful story to the children about Michael as a young boy and the bird lady and the tuppence. He says he does it so beautifully, so calibrated, so from his heart. I was like, there's no one like him. Yeah.
The film is so perfect in so many ways, and that's just like a cherry on the top of it. The kids are amazing too, and let's just talk about that because it's hard to find great kid actors and great kid actors who can sort of do what these kids have to do in this film. And let's talk about that process of it, Robin, finding these three amazing kids.
Well, I love those children, and we saw over 1,000 children. You have to do it because you have to find the ones. And here's what I was looking for, and it's not easy to find: real kids. Not showbiz kids. It's tricky because they come in. Listen, it's not easy. They come in with their 8x10s, and they're up in their ballad, and they're going to say, "Would you like to hear something from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Or would you like to hear something from Annie?" It's like, oh boy, okay, But then you find that special thing that's real, because on film it's just different than theater, where you really have to be able to. You can't hide, like I said before. You're so there. You're so present, and as soon as there's that moment from a kid's performance for me on film or anywhere, that's like you're like, oh no. And so I want to find the ones that are like, you know what I'm talking about. So but you want to find that truth, that vulnerability, that real kid. And so the little one, Georgie, who's played by Joel Dawson, had never done anything. And I saw this spark in him. I saw him. And he was just so funny and a little wild. And, I remember when we were shooting on the set, people would say, well, we should tell him that the blocking's here. I said, don't tell him. Just let him see. Let's see where he goes. Let's see what happens. Don't clip his wings. Let him just be. Let's see what happens. And he was so inventive. There's one little moment I could hear on his microphone. You can see it in the movie, but it's other people talking. Everyone else is talking, and I can hear on his microphone. Mary gave him the parrot umbrella, and he's looking at the parrot umbrella and saying, "I heard you speak. I know you can speak." While another scene's happening, And I'm hearing him say, "Come on, I know you can do it. Don't play with me." He's talking to this umbrella. I thought, this little boy's a genius, because he wasn't told not to do that. He's living the scene. It was so beautiful. Those three kids are divine.
We're going to get to some questions from the audience in a moment, but I just want to wrap up that section of the conversation, Rob, with talking about the tone of it. And I've seen this film now about 5 times, and maybe even more. And I'm going to be watching it again this weekend. It's actually already planned with the family, which I'm happy to. But every time I well up, and there's lots of things going on there. And the very first time I saw it, I said to somebody, it makes me feel like I'm coming home to some place I didn't know I needed to get to. And it reminded me of like the first time that you're at the Magic Kingdom, when you just think, oh, it's going to be a park, there's going to be Goofy and there's rides, yeah. And then you get there and you're on the main street and you see the castle and you go, oh, I get it. There's something here. And then when she comes in on the kite string and all the way through, the tone of this movie is so exactly perfect. And we've talked about this. It would have been easy for other filmmakers to sort of do a little winking, to kind of have that tone be a little like, we know you know what we're doing. Right. But the tone is so essential to kind of keep it earnest and pure and pure of heart, I guess is sort of the easiest phrase, right?
That's so beautiful, Joe, and so articulate. That is exactly what I wanted to achieve. The last thing I wanted to believe, because I feel this film is for adults. I honestly do. I'm glad the kids are going, and it's fabulous. I'm so thrilled, but it's for me and for us and for people, because the P.L. Travers books all said throughout them, the consistent theme is about how adults forget. And because life creeps in. And so imagination and wonder and joy, all that goes away with the reality of life, and you become more cynical. And that's just what happens. This movie is void of cynicism, which is not current, but it's so important to me because I don't live there. That's why this is my most personal film, by far. It comes right from here. And it also, I hope, is void of sentimentality, because that is the other thing that if you tip to that, it dies. For me, because then it's like, oh, it's too much. And I wanted to find the truth in this family that's dealing with loss. So many people have come up to me who have had loss, and who hasn't had loss in their life? Everyone has had major loss in their life, and said this movie has helped them heal from loss. And that's so important to me. I mean, that's why the movie, for me, was made. Because she comes back, Mary Poppins comes back out of the sky to help this family move forward and help them heal, and does it without asking anything in return, which is, to me, the great definition of empathy. And she does that and goes, and it's it's that beautiful moment at the end when they say, she's left, hasn't she? She doesn't say goodbye. She says yes, and she says, thank you, Mary Poppins, and she did it and went. It's very moving to me. And so some people might find it trivial. To me, it's to me the most important thing in life. To be able to wake up with a sense of wonder about life and about how you move forward with joy. To me, especially now. That's how I feel.
And like Mary Poppins herself, the film arrives exactly when we need it in this moment. And absolutely right. We're going to take a couple of questions now. This first question is, we kind of talked a little bit about this, Rob. How did you work with David McGee in creating the beautiful and elaborately visual screenplay? I guess maybe to kind of riff off that a little bit, was that how much of perhaps the visuals, or how much of the aspects of the magical world, maybe in some ways, were in the script, or just kind of any of the sort of subtleties like that?
I just think it's so important that it's all in the script because it's your guide for everybody. It's like, it's my master plan for everyone to see so that we know what we're doing. Of course, then, the photographer, the cinematographer, the DP, Dion Beebe, and John Meyer, the production designer, Sandy Powell, the costume designer, bring it to life in ways that were more incredible than I could possibly imagine. But it's all there in the script. It's and the other thing I like to do, which is to meet with everybody. It's a collaboration, especially musicals. And musicals on film, it's so many moving parts. There's a musical director, and then there's a dance arranger, and there are orchestrators, and of course here there's composers and lyricists. And that's just the music end of things, and a musical supervisor that I have, and costume designers, and stunts. And I would have production meetings that were big as this room, like that many people, but everyone has to know what we're doing. I don't want anybody knowing, going, what are we doing? It's that, that things, it's like, what are we doing? It's like, no, we're all doing this together. And what are the questions? Let's solve them now, So and David is an incredible collaborator. To write a screenplay for a musical is probably the hardest thing in the world, because what happens is you have to move into a song, and then the best work of the scene becomes a song. So the great monologue or the great line or the great moment is a song. So and then you have to sort of let that go and let it go into the song and then come out of it. Yeah. So it's a very complicated thing, and David is such a brilliant collaborator, and it's all that. It's that great team.
Yeah. And this is a question, by the way, was from Phyllis. This one is from Jeanette. What are the biggest differences between directing and doing choreography for the stage and for the screen, and how do your instincts adjust?
Wow. In many ways, it's exactly the same, I think. Directing for stage and directing for film. It's exactly the same, because you are trying to create a story. You're trying to tell a story. And how it's told is it's just different, because how you're filming it versus the stage thing. I was talking before about building a performance. You have out of town, you have previews, you have, the run of a show to perfect. You don't have that time. So I would say it's all like, it's like condensed. It's all condensed. Yeah. So there's a excitement to that too, because you're moving quickly, and everybody has to know that it's like, this is it. Who learned that was Lin-Manuel. Lin-Manuel, because I remember at the beginning of rehearsals, he was like, "Wow, this is gonna be fun," and it was like, "Oh, we're moving fast." Oh, and he was learning about film. And he was watching Emily like a hawk, and it was fantastic to see that happen. And he got it so quick. He said, "Oh, I get it," and he loved it. He loved it, and he was so great. I would literally say before we would roll, I always say thank you to everybody before we go. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Lynn. And he would say, "Thank you for changing my life." Every time, which I loved about him. He loved the process, and because you had to be there in a very different way. And than you would in theater.
Yeah, and his very first day on set or scene to film was the animated scene in the bowl, right? That was
the great thing was to start with Emily and Lynn in that number. That number, Our Cover Is Not the Book. That's what we started with, and the reason we did that was, I said, for the animators, but I also loved doing it because it was both of them, to get those nerves out. Emily said she was like this. She had like a hat in her shaking, and the hat, and because it was like, we're gonna go, yeah. But we had rehearsed so much, we were ready for it. Yeah. That we had rehearsed, and they were ready. And I'm so impressed by film actors, because they literally are fearless. You have to be. You have to just be there, and then you have to know to let it in too. It's a very complicated thing, because it's just about truth. I always think of it as like a hose. I think of the theater, you have to, it's the same power, but you have to spread it like that. It has to reach the back of the house, but it's the same power. With film, it's the same power, but it's a fine spray. Do you know what I mean? It's that, so it's just like that. But you can't just, and not have the thing behind it. It's the same, all comes from the same place. It's just how it comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, we talked about him earlier, but I just want to mention, of course, Scott Whitman and Marc Shaiman again, because the music is so phenomenal, and so many of these songs are so memorable, and including the Lullaby, which is where the Lost Things go. And these are songs that they had a high bar to hit, and they hit them, which is to match the previous film, and then do their own thing. And some of this music is just, this kind of flows through you. It's just so beautiful.
That's a beautiful song to me, because it was what we were talking about, loss. How do you talk to children about loss? How do you move forward? And there's that great moment before the number starts where the little boy says, "I miss mother." It's just a very natural thing. The child says, "I miss mother." And we see, and I purposely shot this and spoke to Emily about it. I wanted a private moment for her, away from the kids, how she really feels, before she has to sort of put on Mary Poppins. And there's a moment where she looks up like, what do I do now? And then she realizes she must help them understand that nothing's ever lost. And then then Mark and Scott, this is the first song they wrote when we were working on it, because they felt it so deeply. They wrote this beautiful lullaby about loss and where it goes. And it's so well crafted because it doesn't talk about the mother till the last verse. And never says the word mother. It's very sophisticated. She says, when you need her touch and loving care, you know, and she's touching at that moment. She's touching Georgie, and you know, because they all, you know, these kids need a mother or a maternal figure, and Mary Poppins gives that to them. And then what I love about it is in the reprise they then teach that to their father about loss. She's not gone, and then he realizes that. It's a beautiful full circle.
And for all the big moments and amazing moments in the movie, there's also so much subtlety and so much grace going on, and that's one of them. This is a great question to end on, which is from Elizabeth, and it's what first drew you to become part of this wonderful, frustrating, and joyous land of theater and film?
Oh my God!
What a great question! Great question, Elizabeth.
Because I couldn't do anything else, and I honestly think that's the truth. You have to not want to do nothing else. It has to be in your blood from the beginning. It can't be another choice. This is the only choice. This is it. It's not easy. We know it's not easy. It is just not. It's the hardest business in the world because you know what? You're not selling your vacuum cleaner. You're selling you. So when you are rejected, you have to remember you're a vacuum cleaner. Because does that make sense? Yeah. You have to know that. I'm not you, because otherwise it's too personal and too horrible. It's just, you know what I mean? You are selling that, and you have to be smart about that. And you know, and it's the most difficult thing. I hate auditions because I think they're so hard. The only thing I will say about an audition is I never think of it as an audition. Think of it as a performance. People have no imagination. Zero, none. They want to see that you are the character because they want to cast it too. So they want you to walk in as the character and be the character. And they're like, oh, well, he's fabulous. They don't know. And you have to separate yourself when you leave. I am a product that they are considering. It has nothing to do with me. It's so important. It's so important. And because otherwise, and you have to create your own armor. You have to have your own armor. Your armor is, I love what I do. I'm proud of this. I have a life outside this. All that's your armor. And that keeps you whole. It's so hard. And so, you know, it's the most gorgeous thing to do in the world when it works. But, you know, no one has had this. Everyone's had this. Me, everybody here has had this. It's part of the journey. It's okay. That's how it works. That is how it works. I'm telling you. That's how I feel.
Well, thank you for all of that. Thank you for all of the amazing work you put into the world.
You're amazing, Joe. Thank you,
Rob.
everybody. This was a thrill.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rob
to talk
Marshall.
to this gorgeous group of people. I'm so moved that you're here.